Well, good evening and welcome. It's a blessing to be here with you tonight. I've been under the weather these past few days with pneumonia, but by God's grace, I'm beginning to turn the corner. I'm taking a slow, resting, fasting, and trusting in the natural healing God has placed all around us. And perhaps that's why tonight's message feels especially timely. We're about to listen to the forgiveness secret Jesus taught by Joel Goldsmith, a message that reminds us that healing and forgiveness spring from the same divine source within us. Before we start, let's see who has joined us tonight. Welcome, Christina Collins, Jean Thoreau, Matthew Thomas, Pauline Celestine, Peter, Rod Tucker, Sally Puckett, Sharon Joy, Shirley York, Tom Leonard. Welcome, welcome. In the message we're about to hear, Joel Goldsmith reveals that forgiveness isn't something we perform outwardly. It's a spiritual realization of our oneness with God. When we awaken to that truth, every shadow of resentment or separation dissolves, and divine love restores us to wholeness. So as we listen together, let's open our hearts and allow these words to reach beyond our thoughts, to touch the inner stillness where God's healing presence is already at work. Now let's begin the forgiveness secret Jesus taught.
For years, you've heard about forgiveness. Churches preach it, self-help books recommend it, therapists suggest it. But Joel Goldsmith discovered something revolutionary that changes everything you thought you knew. True forgiveness isn't what you've been taught. It's not about forcing yourself to accept the unacceptable or pretending hurt never happened. What Goldsmith revealed through deep mystical practice is this: real forgiveness happens when you understand there was never anything to forgive in the first place. This isn't denial. This is seeing through the illusion of separation to the truth of spiritual reality. When you grasp this, physical healing begins, relationships transform, and your entire life shifts. The secret lies in recognizing that what appeared as harm was simply human consciousness operating in ignorance of its divine nature. Every person who ever hurt you was acting from a limited state of awareness, not from their true spiritual self. This understanding doesn't excuse behavior, it transcends it entirely. Jesus taught forgiveness from a dimension most people never reach. He didn't say forgive because it's morally right or because you should be nice. He taught forgiveness because he saw reality as it truly is, beyond the material appearance. When he said forgive 70 times 7, he meant keep returning to spiritual truth until you see only God's presence. Goldsmith spent decades penetrating this mystery. He discovered that unforgiveness keeps you bound to the past, not through guilt, but through continuing to give reality to an illusion. Every time you rehearse your grievance, you breathe life into something that has no power except what you give it. This is the invisible chain that blocks healing and abundance. The moment you truly understand forgiveness as Jesus taught it, something remarkable happens in your consciousness. The past loses its grip. The person who hurt you is suddenly seen in an entirely different light, not as your enemy, but as another expression of divine life struggling through human limitation. Most people practice what Goldsmith called personal sense forgiveness. This is where you, as a person, try to forgive another person for their actions. This keeps the entire drama alive. You remain the victim, they remain the villain, and forgiveness becomes a heroic struggle. But this isn't the forgiveness that heals. True forgiveness happens when you rise above personal sense entirely. You stop seeing yourself as a vulnerable human body that can be harmed. You stop seeing others as separate powers that can hurt you. Instead, you recognize one infinite consciousness expressing itself through infinite forms. From this altitude, what is there to forgive? This is not spiritual bypassing or avoiding real pain. This is entering the consciousness where pain dissolves because you see its unreality. Goldsmith proved this through countless healings. Physical conditions that doctors called permanent disappeared when the patient stopped holding grievances and entered the consciousness of divine oneness. Here's the practice that changes everything. When someone hurts you or when past pain surfaces, pause. Don't try to forgive them. Instead, turn within and recognize this truth. God is the only power, the only presence, the only reality. Nothing opposed to God's nature can have real existence. Whatever appeared as harm was appearance only, not reality. Then take the second step. Recognize that the person before you, regardless of their actions, is spiritual being having a human experience. They are not their behavior. They are not their unconscious choices. At their core, they are the same divine consciousness you are. When you see this, forgiveness isn't something you do. It's something that happens naturally. Practice this daily, especially with small irritations. Don't wait for major trauma. Train your consciousness to immediately return to spiritual truth whenever anything disturbs your peace. Over weeks and months, this becomes automatic. Your consciousness transforms, and with it, your entire experience of life transforms. Let me share what happened to Margaret, a woman who attended Goldsmith's classes in the 1950s. She carried a devastating burden. Her sister had betrayed her in a business venture, costing Margaret her life savings and nearly destroying her marriage. For 3 years, Margaret tried every form of forgiveness she knew. She prayed, she went to therapy, she even confronted her sister. Nothing released the pain. The resentment was eating her alive, manifesting as chronic digestive problems and insomnia. Then she heard Goldsmith explain true forgiveness. He told her to stop trying to forgive her sister as one person forgiving another person. Instead, recognize that in spiritual reality, there is no sister separate from God, no betrayal separate from divine harmony. Margaret practiced this for 6 weeks. Every time anger rose, she didn't fight it or feel guilty about it. She simply returned to the truth. God is the only presence. Gradually, something shifted. The anger didn't just diminish, it transformed into understanding. She saw her sister's actions came from fear and ignorance, not evil. More remarkably, her digestive issues resolved completely. Within 3 months, Margaret reported a miracle. Not only was she free from resentment, but her sister reached out with a genuine apology and partial repayment. Goldsmith explained this wasn't coincidence. When you stop holding someone in the consciousness of wrongdoer, you release them to find their own spiritual truth. Then there was David, a war veteran who came to Goldsmith's practice carrying wounds deeper than his physical injuries. He had witnessed difficult situations that haunted him daily. Traditional therapy helped him function, but the nightmares persisted. The anger at what he'd seen felt justified, righteous even. How could he forgive what seemed unforgivable? Goldsmith didn't tell him to forgive the actions. He taught him something more profound, to see beyond the human scene entirely. In God's universe, there is no war, no cruelty, no evil. These exist only in the dream of material sense, the collective hallucination of separation from divine love. David's healing wouldn't come from forgiving evil, but from awakening to reality. For months, David practiced meditation on one truth. Only God's kingdom is real. The battlefield existed in time and space, but time and space are not ultimate reality. Consciousness is. As his consciousness shifted from human horror to divine presence, the nightmares began losing their power. Not because he forgot, but because he was seeing from a higher dimension. After a full year of practice, David experienced what he called liberation. The memories remained, but they no longer controlled him. He could speak of his experiences without being dragged back into emotional pain. He had discovered what Jesus meant when he said, "My kingdom is not of this world." David learned to live from that kingdom. Consider Rachel's story, a woman diagnosed with an autoimmune condition. Her doctors found no physical cause until a perceptive physician asked about her emotional life. Rachel revealed she harbored deep resentment toward her former business partner who had treated her unfairly for years. The doctor suggested this might be connected, but Rachel had already tried forgiving countless times without success. When Rachel found Goldsmith's teachings, she understood why traditional forgiveness hadn't worked. She had been trying to forgive from the level of personal identity, keeping the victim's story alive, even as she attempted to release it. Goldsmith's approach was radically different. Stop seeing yourself as someone who was wronged, and the other as someone who wronged you. Rachel began a daily practice. Instead of affirming, "I forgive my partner," she meditated on spiritual truth. There is no wronged person here, no wrongdoing person there, only divine consciousness expressing perfectly. This felt almost impossible at first. Her mind screamed that her pain was real, the betrayal was real. But she persisted with the practice. Over 8 months, something extraordinary happened. Her autoimmune markers began normalizing. More importantly, her relationship with her former partner transformed without them changing at all. Rachel simply stopped reacting from old wounds because she had dissolved the wounded identity itself. Her doctor called it remarkable. Rachel called it the power of seeing with Christ consciousness. Here's what medical science is beginning to confirm about what Goldsmith taught decades ago. Unforgiveness creates measurable stress in your body. It elevates cortisol, weakens immune function, and creates chronic inflammation. But here's the deeper truth. This isn't just psychological, it's spiritual. When you hold grievances, you're choosing to live in separation consciousness rather than unity consciousness. Every major spiritual tradition points to this truth, but Goldsmith made it practical and accessible. He showed that forgiveness isn't a moral commandment you struggle to obey. It's a description of what happens when you see reality clearly. In the light of divine truth, grievances simply cannot exist, because the separate powers you thought could harm you are revealed as illusion. The transformation doesn't require years of therapy or superhuman willpower. It requires a shift in perception, a willingness to see beyond material appearances to spiritual reality. When you practice this consistently, your entire energy changes. People notice you're different before you tell them anything. Your health improves, opportunities appear, relationships heal seemingly on their own. If these transformation stories inspire you to explore Joel Goldsmith's teachings deeper, like this video to help others discover true forgiveness, subscribe for more mystical Christianity wisdom, and comment. Which story resonated most powerfully with your own healing journey? Beyond the primary practice of seeing through material sense to spiritual reality, Goldsmith taught complementary techniques that accelerate your transformation. The first is what he called spiritual listening. This isn't ordinary meditation where you try to empty your mind or visualize outcomes. This is resting in receptivity to divine wisdom, allowing truth to reveal itself to you. When you're struggling to release a grievance, spend 10 minutes in silent listening. Don't ask for help forgiving. Don't rehearse your hurt. Simply rest in the awareness that infinite intelligence is present right where you are. In this receptive state, insights come that your personal mind could never generate. You suddenly understand the other person's perspective, or you see how the situation served your growth. The second technique is what Goldsmith called treatment through recognition of presence. Throughout your day, pause frequently to recognize, God is here, right where this difficulty appears to be. Not God will fix this situation, but God is the only reality here now. This shifts you out of problem consciousness into presence consciousness. Practice this especially when someone triggers you. Your colleague makes a cutting remark, your partner disappoints you, your neighbor acts inconsiderately. Before reacting, take 3 seconds to recognize, divine love is present here, even though I'm not yet seeing it clearly. This tiny pause prevents you from adding more resentment to your consciousness. The third complementary practice is daily meditation on spiritual identity. Goldsmith emphasized that you cannot truly forgive while you still believe you're a vulnerable material being who can be genuinely harmed. Every morning, spend 5 minutes establishing your true identity. You are not a body with a soul. You are spiritual consciousness expressing through a body. Affirm these truths, not as wishful thinking, but as recognition of what is always true. I am divine life, lived by God. I am spiritual wisdom, guided from within. I am eternal consciousness, untouched by time and circumstance. As this becomes your established consciousness, forgiveness becomes natural, because you recognize nothing has power to diminish what you truly are. The fourth technique involves daily gratitude specifically focused on difficult people and situations. This sounds counterintuitive, but Goldsmith discovered it's transformative. Every evening, find something to appreciate about the person you're working to forgive. Not fake positivity, but genuine recognition that this challenge is pushing you towards spiritual awakening. Thank the situation for forcing you to deepen your practice, to discover spiritual strength you didn't know you had, to learn what cannot be learned in comfort. This isn't about being grateful for harm. It's about recognizing that everything in your experience, when met with spiritual consciousness, becomes a doorway to greater realization. Goldsmith also taught the power of impersonal forgiveness work. You don't just forgive those who hurt you personally. You practice seeing beyond appearances with everyone you encounter. The rude driver, the incompetent clerk, the difficult neighbor you deal with regularly. Each one is an opportunity to practice recognizing divine presence beyond human behavior. This trains your consciousness to automatically default to spiritual truth rather than personal judgment. When you're in the habit of seeing God's presence in strangers, it becomes natural to see it in those closest to you, even when they disappoint or hurt you. Your consciousness becomes a healing presence everywhere you go. Another powerful technique is what Goldsmith called bearing witness to the Christ in others. Regardless of what someone has done, there remains within them the divine spark, the Christ consciousness, their true spiritual identity. Your work is to bear witness to that truth even when they cannot. This isn't about ignoring harmful behavior or removing consequences. It's about maintaining your spiritual altitude regardless of another's actions. When you hold someone in the consciousness of their divine potential rather than their human failure, you become an invisible support for their transformation. Often, people change in your presence without knowing why. Your consciousness of truth about them calls them to their higher nature. The final complementary practice is maintaining what Goldsmith called the secret place of the Most High. This is a consciousness you cultivate where nothing from the outer world can disturb your inner peace. You don't build this through positive thinking or affirmations. You build it through consistent return to the truth that God is the only power. Create a daily practice of entering this secret place. Sit quietly and release every person, every situation, every concern into divine care. Not by pushing them away, but by recognizing they exist in God's universe, not in a threatening material world. As you do this day after day, you develop an unshakable core of peace. From this place of peace, forgiveness isn't work. It's simply how you naturally see everyone and everything. You've trained your consciousness to rest in spiritual reality rather than material appearances. Hurts still happen, disappointments still come, but they no longer penetrate to your core because your core rests in eternal truth. These complementary practices, used together with the primary principle of seeing beyond material sense to spiritual reality, create a transformation that goes far beyond releasing specific grievances. You become a different person, living from a different dimension of consciousness. This is the promise of Joel Goldsmith's practical mysticism, the fulfillment of what Jesus taught. Now let's address the challenges you'll face because Goldsmith never promised this would be easy at first. The primary obstacle is what he called the resistance of personal sense. Your human identity doesn't want to dissolve. It will insist your hurt is real, your grievance is justified. The person who harmed you deserves judgment. This resistance is normal. When it arises, don't fight it and don't feel guilty about it. Simply recognize it for what it is, the voice of material sense trying to maintain its dominance. Return gently to truth. You're not suppressing your feelings. You're choosing which lens you'll look through, the material or the spiritual. With practice, the spiritual lens becomes natural. The second major challenge is what Goldsmith called the bootless cry. This is when you practice these principles but don't see immediate results. You're meditating on divine presence, but you still feel angry. You're recognizing spiritual identity, but your body still hurts. You're tempted to conclude this doesn't work and return to conventional forgiveness or just holding grievances. This is the critical moment. Goldsmith taught that spiritual realization operates differently than material cause and effect. There's often a lag between the shift in consciousness and the manifestation in experience. The transformation is happening in the invisible before it becomes visible. Your work is to persist in truth regardless of appearances, trusting the process. Another common obstacle is the guilt that arises when you can't sustain the elevated consciousness. You have a breakthrough, you feel free, you see with spiritual vision. Then something triggers you and you're back in anger and resentment. You feel like you've failed, like you're not spiritual enough. Goldsmith addressed this directly. You're not trying to be perfect. You're learning a new way of seeing. Think of it like learning a language. You don't expect to speak fluently after a few lessons. You practice. You make mistakes. You practice more. Gradually, the new language becomes natural. It's the same with spiritual consciousness. Each time you catch yourself in resentment and consciously return to truth, you're strengthening the spiritual muscle. The challenge of dealing with ongoing harm is particularly difficult. What if you're practicing forgiveness while someone continues to hurt you? Goldsmith was clear. Spiritual practice doesn't mean remaining in harmful situations. You can recognize someone's divine identity while also setting firm boundaries, leaving relationships, or seeking protection. True forgiveness coexists with wise action. You forgive by seeing beyond their behavior to their spiritual reality, but you respond to their behavior with practical wisdom. Jesus forgave those who crucified him, but he also told his disciples to shake the dust off their feet and leave towns that rejected them. Forgiveness is spiritual, boundaries are practical, both are necessary. Many people struggle with the challenge of forgiving themselves, which Goldsmith considered the deepest work. You can see divine presence in others but remain convinced of your own unworthiness. The guilt and shame you carry about your own past mistakes can be more paralyzing than anything others did to you. This requires the same principle applied inward. Stop seeing yourself as a person who made terrible mistakes and needs forgiveness. Instead, recognize that the one who made those choices was operating in limited consciousness, not from your true spiritual self. This isn't about escaping responsibility. It's about understanding that your identity was never separate from God, even when you were unaware of it. Practice this specifically. When memories of your failures arise, don't rehearse the story. Don't wallow in guilt or try to convince yourself you're forgiven. Simply return to truth. God is the only presence, the only power, the only reality. The identity that failed exists only in limited material sense. Your true self, spiritual and eternal, never sinned because it never left divine perfection. This feels impossible at first because self-condemnation runs so deep. But persist. Every time shame surfaces, use it as a signal to return to spiritual identity. Over time, months or even years, the burden lifts. Not because you've earned forgiveness, but because you've awakened to the truth that you were never actually separate from divine love. The final major obstacle is maintaining your practice when life gets overwhelming. When you're stressed, tired, or dealing with crisis, it's easy to abandon spiritual principles and react from pure emotion. Goldsmith understood this. He taught that your daily practice in peaceful times builds the consciousness that sustains you in difficult times. This is why consistency matters more than intensity. 10 minutes daily of genuine spiritual practice builds stronger consciousness than occasional hours of desperate prayer. You're establishing a foundation that becomes automatic. When crisis hits, your trained consciousness responds with truth before your emotions can take over completely. Don't aim for perfection. Aim for return. You'll forget, you'll react, you'll fall back into old patterns. The victory is in how quickly you recognize it and return to spiritual truth. Each return strengthens the pathway. Eventually, the return happens almost instantaneously. You feel anger rising and immediately remember, this is material sense, not spiritual reality. One practical tip for overcoming all these obstacles: find community with others practicing these principles. Goldsmith's students formed study groups where they supported each other through challenges. When your practice wavers, another's strength lifts you. When someone else struggles, your practice supports them. This is how spiritual consciousness multiplies and strengthens. If these obstacle-breaking insights empower you to persist in your spiritual practice, like this video to support transformative content, subscribe for advanced Joel Goldsmith teachings, and comment, which challenge resonates most with your current journey? Now let's explore advanced integration of these principles into specific life situations, starting with family dynamics. Sarah had been practicing Goldsmith's forgiveness work for over a year with remarkable results in most areas of her life. But every family gathering triggered old wounds with her father. Despite her practice, she still felt criticized and dismissed in his presence. Goldsmith would say this is where the rubber meets the road. Family relationships are the ultimate test because they formed your earliest patterns of consciousness. The key is recognizing that you're not actually dealing with your father. You're dealing with your own consciousness about your father, the identity patterns formed decades ago that replay automatically. Sarah learned to prepare spiritually before family visits. She spent several days beforehand in meditation, establishing the truth. Her father is a spiritual being, expressing perfectly even when humanly he appears critical. More importantly, She is not the person he thinks she is, or even the person she thinks she is in his presence. She is divine consciousness itself. The breakthrough came when Sarah stopped trying to change her father, or even change her reaction to him. Instead, she rested in knowing that the whole drama existed in material sense only. In spiritual reality, there was only perfect divine relationship. She maintained this consciousness silently throughout visits. Gradually, incredibly, her father's behavior shifted without her saying a word about it. James applied these principles in the workplace where he faced a supervisor who seemed determined to undermine him. For months, James had tried conventional forgiveness, telling himself his boss was doing his best, trying to see his perspective. Nothing changed except James developed stress-related health issues from suppressing anger. When James discovered Goldsmith's approach, he realized he'd been trying to improve the human picture rather than see beyond it. He stopped focusing on his boss's behavior and began a practice of recognizing divine order governing his career. Not divine order that would punish his boss or get him promoted, but recognition that infinite intelligence was present right where the conflict appeared. This is crucial to understand. You're not using spiritual truth to manipulate outcomes. You're aligning with truth and allowing whatever needs to happen to unfold. James maintained his practice for 3 months while also updating his resume and setting clear professional boundaries. He wasn't passively accepting mistreatment in the name of spirituality. What happened surprised everyone. His supervisor was transferred to another department for reasons unrelated to James. His replacement immediately recognized James's contributions, but more significantly, James noticed he was no longer vulnerable to workplace dynamics in the same way. He developed an inner stability that didn't depend on external approval or fair treatment. Consider Maria's situation with health professionals after a medical misdiagnosis caused significant harm. She had legitimate grounds for disappointment and concern, but her attorney noticed the ongoing stress was affecting her physically and emotionally, undermining her well-being. Traditional stress management techniques barely helped. Then Maria found Goldsmith's work through a friend. The challenge was enormous. How do you practice forgiveness while simultaneously pursuing accountability? Goldsmith's answer: forgiveness is a state of consciousness, not a course of action. Maria could recognize her doctor's spiritual identity while still addressing professional concerns. These operate on different planes entirely. Maria practiced a specific technique. Before meetings with attorneys or thinking about her case, she spent 10 minutes in what Goldsmith called treatment. She recognized that only divine intelligence actually governed health, and that material medicine, while useful, had no ultimate power. This wasn't denial of what happened. It was placing it in proper perspective. The result was remarkable. Maria proceeded with her case, but without the consuming frustration that had been draining her. She could discuss medical details calmly, make clear decisions, and when she ultimately reached a fair resolution, she felt relief rather than vindication. The situation was addressed properly, but Maria was free from the emotional burden because she'd maintained her spiritual altitude throughout. Then there's the advanced practice of what Goldsmith called redeeming the past. Thomas carried difficult memories from his college years when a trusted mentor had betrayed his confidence, damaging his academic reputation. Years of counseling helped him move forward, but certain triggers still sent him into emotional turmoil. The betrayal happened decades ago, yet it remained powerfully present. Goldsmith taught that you don't heal the past by reliving it or even reframing it. You heal it by recognizing it exists only in memory, which exists only in present consciousness. Right now, in this moment, there is only divine presence. The betrayed student doesn't exist now. The betrayer doesn't exist now. There is only eternal spiritual being reading these words. Thomas practiced time redemption meditation. He didn't visualize the past differently or try to send love back in time. Instead, he rested in knowing that past, present, and future all exist in eternal now, which is God's presence. From this altitude, the timeline of betrayal lost its power. He remained the same consciousness throughout all appearances of time. This is perhaps the most advanced application because it challenges everything material sense believes about causation and time. But Thomas discovered that consistent practice actually dissolved the emotional charge around those memories. Not by processing or integrating, but by awakening from the dream of time altogether. He was living proof that spiritual consciousness transcends psychological healing while including it. We arrive now at total transformation, where forgiveness becomes your natural state of consciousness rather than a practice you perform. Linda had been applying Goldsmith's principles for 3 years. Gradually, she noticed something profound. She could no longer sustain grievances even when she tried. Her consciousness had so thoroughly shifted to spiritual reality that material offenses simply didn't register the same way. This isn't spiritual bypassing or emotional numbness. Linda still felt appropriate emotions and took wise action when needed. But the sticky quality of resentment had vanished. Someone could treat her unfairly, and she felt momentary frustration, but it passed quickly, like clouds across sky. She no longer rehearsed injuries or built identities around her wounds. Goldsmith called this living from the mountaintop. You've climbed so high in consciousness that you see human drama from spiritual altitude. You're compassionate toward suffering, including your own, but you're not fooled into thinking it's ultimately real. You respond to the human scene while remaining anchored in divine truth. The transformation affects everyone around you without you preaching or teaching. People feel different in your presence. Conflicts dissolve more easily. Others find themselves spontaneously apologizing or changing behavior. This isn't because you're manipulating them. It's because your consciousness of their divine nature calls them to it. At this stage of practice, you understand what Jesus meant by loving your enemies. It's not straining to feel warm feelings toward those who hurt you. It's seeing so clearly into spiritual reality that the category of enemy ceases to exist. Everyone is consciousness expressing at different levels of awareness. Some are deeply asleep in material sense. Some are awakening, but all are divine life itself. This consciousness becomes a healing force in the world. You walk into tense situations and tension eases without you doing anything. You think of someone struggling and they report feeling sudden peace. This isn't magic or wishful thinking. It's the practical result of established spiritual consciousness affecting the collective consciousness field. You also discover that living from this altitude doesn't make you passive or weak. Quite the opposite. You can take strong action, speak difficult truths, and maintain firm boundaries without losing your spiritual center. The difference is you're not acting from wounded ego or personal agenda. You're acting from clarity about what serves the highest good. People often ask at this stage whether you still need to practice. Goldsmith said yes, because you're maintaining altitude, not achieving it once and for all. Just as a pilot must keep making adjustments to stay at cruising altitude, you keep returning to spiritual truth. But it becomes effortless, natural, like breathing. The ultimate revelation is that forgiveness, rightly understood, is simply another name for seeing truly. You're not forgiving the world. You're waking up from the dream that anything exists apart from divine perfection. Every person, every situation, every appearance of difficulty is simply divine reality misperceived through the lens of material sense. When you see this completely, suffering doesn't disappear from human experience, but your relationship to it transforms entirely. You respond with compassion and practical help, while knowing that spiritual reality remains untouched and perfect. This paradox, holding both human tenderness and spiritual truth, is the mark of mature consciousness. You realize that Jesus' most radical teaching wasn't forgive those who hurt you. It was his underlying vision. There is only God, only divine presence, only spiritual reality. Harm, sin, evil, separation, these are all misperceptions that vanish in the light of true seeing. Forgiveness is the process of letting that light dissolve the darkness of material sense. This doesn't mean you suddenly have all the answers or never struggle. But you've found the key that unlocks every door. Whatever challenge arises, you know the response. Return to truth. Recognize presence. See beyond appearance to reality. This simple practice, applied consistently over a lifetime, transforms everything. So what happens when you truly understand the power of forgiveness Jesus taught through Joel Goldsmith's mystical lens? You discover you're not a vulnerable human trying to survive in a threatening world. You're infinite consciousness experiencing itself through a human form. Nothing can actually diminish you because what you truly are was never born and will never die. You stop collecting wounds and building an identity from your suffering. Instead, you use every difficulty as an opportunity to practice seeing from spiritual altitude. Your biography no longer defines you. Your past no longer controls you. You're free, genuinely free, in a way that most people can't even imagine. Your relationships transform because you're no longer looking to others to complete you or validate you. You're meeting them from wholeness, seeing their divinity even when they can't see it themselves. This changes the energy of every interaction. You become someone people instinctively trust and feel safe around. Your health improves because you're no longer poisoning your system with the stress chemicals of chronic resentment. Your career flourishes because you're no longer sabotaging yourself with victim consciousness. Your spiritual life deepens because you've moved beyond religion into direct experience of divine presence. You've discovered what Jesus knew and Joel Goldsmith proved. When you see truly, everything changes. If your consciousness has expanded through these Joel Goldsmith teachings on the true power of forgiveness Jesus demonstrated, like this video to help others discover spiritual freedom. Subscribe for more transformative mystical Christianity, and comment "I am transformed" to affirm your commitment to seeing with spiritual vision.
Well, what a beautiful reminder of God's love and the healing power of forgiveness. Now, I found some takeaways that can help me be more patient and forgiving of careless drivers who threaten my safety. Only God's kingdom is real. I see in you the presence of God. God is the only presence. Perhaps my biggest shift in consciousness was when I was finally able to accept that the Christ who died on the cross dwells within me. God and I are one, inseparably connected. This is both an exhilarating and a sobering realization, because I now realize why life and death are in the power of the tongue, and why I now need to guard my thoughts and words more securely than money in a bank vault, because everything I speak, whether positive or negative, will surely come to pass, because I'm speaking through the same voice that said, "Let there be light," and the worlds were formed. When we understand, as Joel Goldsmith taught, that forgiveness is not about excusing another's actions, but awakening to the divine presence that knows no separation, we begin to live from the heart of Christ himself. May this understanding continue to grow and unfold in us, not just tonight, but in the quiet moments that follow. May every memory, every wound, and every burden be lifted and replaced with the light of divine realization until only love remains. Let us close in prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the wisdom shared tonight, and for the still small voice within that always calls us home to peace. Help us to see through the veil of human story into the truth of your perfect creation. Where we once saw fault in others, let us now see your presence. Where we once carried hurt, let us feel your healing love. Teach us to forgive as you forgive, to recognize that in your eyes, nothing has ever been lost or broken. Restore our strength, renew our faith, and let your light guide our every breath. In the name of Christ within us, amen. With that, have a wonderful rest of your evening. Mark your calendars for Tuesday. We'll be back at 8 p.m. And God bless. We'll see you later.
Good night, John. Feel better fast.
Good night. Thank you.
Feel better
Good
soon.
night.